On a late autumn afternoon, the sky glowed with the orange-yellow hues of sunset. A gentle breeze wafted by, carrying the characteristic coolness of the leaf-falling season. On a small street in the suburbs of America, the scene was unusually quiet. Golden leaves fall in waves, covering the sidewalk with a soft carpet. The houses along both sides of the street began to light up, the yellow light spilling through the windows, reflecting the images of families gathering to prepare dinner. Patches of smoke rose from the small chimneys, blending with the cool air, bringing a sense of tranquility, as if all worries were left behind. In that setting, James Carter, a retired Marine, was slowly walking down the familiar road. He had just finished a meeting with an old friend at the small cafe at the end of the street. The simple outfit and the thick gray jacket hugged his sturdy figure. In his hand, he held a cap with the Marine Corps emblem carefully sewn on it. It is not just a cap, but also a symbol of pride in the glorious years he dedicated to the country. Though he is 70 years old, his physique remains robust, his steps steady and slow, yet exuding the strong demeanor of a soldier who has endured many hardships and challenges. His eyes are bright and sharp, reflecting calmness and experience, as if nothing could unsettle him. When he was lost in thoughts about the stories of the past, suddenly from afar, loud laughter mixed with unusual shouts broke the tranquility of the afternoon. That was not the usual sound of people passing by on the street. It carries an unsettling feeling, evoking a sense of unease. James Carter paused, his brow slightly furrowed, and turned his head towards the source of the sound. Just a few hundred meters away from him, right at the street corner, a group of 5 to 6 young people were surrounding a young girl. The girl was wearing a simple dress, her face clearly showing worry and tension. She tried to avoid the gaze of those bothering her, but the encirclement of the group of young people seemed to tighten more and more. The inappropriate words and actions of the group of young people made the situation more tense than ever. James stood still for a moment, his sharp eyes observing the entire situation. He clearly saw the fear in the girl's eyes, as well as the arrogance and defiance in the gaze of the group of young men. No one on the street intervened or even dared to speak up. Everyone just quietly watched from a distance, their eyes filled with fear. The space, once peaceful, is now filled with suffocating and uncomfortable tension. James Carter sighed, but not out of fatigue. It was because he knew he couldn't stand by and watch this injustice happen. With the instinct of a soldier, he sensed that this was not a situation he could ignore. The years of fighting on the battlefield had honed his ability to analyze situations and make decisions in the most tense circumstances. And now, even though he has been away from the military for many years, he still upholds the oath he once swore: to protect the weak, to uphold justice. Without a moment's hesitation, he slowly approached. His gait was not hurried, but each step carried an invisible strength. No one noticed his presence at first, but as he drew closer, the dignified aura of a soldier who had endured decades of warfare began to emerge. The story begins here, at the very moment James Carter decided to confront injustice in the midst of a seemingly unbreakable peaceful afternoon. The young girl, around 20 years old, wore a simple light blue dress, clutching her handbag tightly as if it were the last barrier protecting her. She tried to avoid the group of young men, looking for a way to slip past, but each step she took was blocked by one of them. One of them, with a tall stature and messy hair, snatched the handbag from her hand. He swung the bag high, laughing loudly as he said, "Little girl, why be afraid? We just want to have a little fun." His words immediately made the whole group burst into laughter, their loud, provocative laughter echoing. Another guy stood close to her, bent down, stared intently at her face, and then made an impolite remark, causing her to flinch. her eyes flashing with extreme fear. She took a few steps back, her back hitting the old brick wall by the roadside, with no way to escape. The residents around seemed to notice something unusual. A few people stood at a distance, sneaking glances through the windows or from behind the curtains. No one dares to speak up. No one dares to step out and intervene. Fear seems to be enveloping everything, making the atmosphere even more suffocating. James Carter stood still a few steps away, his stern gaze observing everything. His eyebrows furrowed tightly, his hand gripping the baseball cap in a moment of anger. But the anger did not make him lose control. Instead, he clearly sensed the injustice in this situation and knew that it was time for him to intervene. James Carter walked step by step towards the group of young people. Each of his steps was not hurried, but carried an imposing presence that drew the attention of those nearby. When he got close enough, his deep yet clear voice rang out, "You guys, stop right now. She is not your plaything." The group of young people turned around in surprise, their eyes glancing at him mockingly. One of them, seemingly the leader, smirked and said, "Old man, who do you think you are meddling in our business?" James Carter did not answer immediately. He simply looked straight into the eyes of the one who had just spoken, his gaze so sharp that it made him stop laughing for a second. He continued, his voice not loud but strong enough to make the surrounding atmosphere seem to freeze. "I don't care who you are, but what you are doing is wrong. Stop right now before things go too far." The girl, still standing against the wall, widened her eyes in surprise upon hearing the calm yet powerful voice of the unfamiliar man. A glimmer of hope appeared in her eyes, but it was still mixed with worry, as if she feared that the group of young men would harm him. The group of young men, after a moment of surprise, quickly regained their defiant demeanor. Another guy, smaller in stature, but with a haughty look in his eyes, stepped forward, looked James Carter up and down, and sneered, "Old man, you'd better go home and rest. This is not your business." The leader stepped forward, blocking James's path, his voice filled with challenge. "If you don't want trouble, then get lost. Otherwise..." He didn't finish his sentence, just slightly tilted his chin towards his group like a veiled threat. But James Carter did not back down. He did not back down. His gaze remained calm yet sharp, like a hunter staring directly at its prey. He replied, his voice low but firm, "I have already said it. Stop it right now." Deep down, James knew he was facing young, impulsive, and thoughtless individuals. He did not feel afraid, for he had faced much more dangerous situations in his life. But what makes him feel sad is the recklessness of these young people and the indifference of those around them. He recalls the days when he was still a soldier, fighting to protect what was right, to bring safety to the vulnerable. And even though many years have passed since he left the military, that ideal remains intact within him. Even though he knew that the group of young people could act recklessly, James remained undeterred. He believes that sometimes just one timely action, one strong word can change the situation. And that is exactly what he is about to do. James Carter continued to advance, his gaze fixed on the group of young people. He stood just a few steps away from them, maintaining a distance sufficient for them to clearly feel the authority emanating from this middle-aged man. His deep yet authoritative voice rang out again, clear and decisive. "That's enough. I say it one last time, leave now before you regret it." His calmness and confidence suddenly made the atmosphere fall silent for a moment. The young girl, still pressed against the wall behind, looked up, her eyes a mix of confusion and a hint of hope. His words and demeanor were like a lifebuoy, pulling her out of the enveloping fear. She gently clenched her fists, as if preparing for anything that might happen next. The group of young people was initially a bit surprised. A few of them glanced at each other, the arrogance in their eyes momentarily fading. Perhaps they did not expect that in such a quiet street, there would be someone daring enough to step out and confront them. However, the arrogance and impulsiveness of youth quickly regained the upper hand. The leader, a tall young man with messy hair, stepped forward. He squinted at James Carter, smirking derisively. "Old man, who do you think you are? Don't think that a few words from you can scare us. This is our business. You shouldn't interfere." He spoke while waving his hand, signaling to the group behind him as if to further suppress the atmosphere. The others burst into laughter, their mocking laughter echoing with defiance. One of them, a small but clever young man, said loudly, "Do you know who you are standing in front of? Or do you want to see what we will do?" James Carter did not answer immediately. He stood still, quietly observing every action, every expression of the group of young people. His eyes were sharp like a commander assessing the enemy, searching for weaknesses. After a brief silence, he took another step forward, the distance between him and the leader now only a few steps. His gaze never left the young man's face, and this time his voice became colder, as if containing an unshakable power. "You don't understand your situation. This is the last time I'm reminding you. Leave immediately, before I have to show you why you should listen to me." The confidence and decisiveness in his voice made the atmosphere around him freeze. A few members of the group of young people began to feel awkward. Although they didn't say it out loud, their eyes showed hesitation. Perhaps they realized that this man was not like the old men they had encountered before. However, the leader still refused to back down. He raised an eyebrow, trying to maintain his arrogance, even though a hint of caution had emerged deep within. He smirked, then said, "Do you think you can do anything? Call the police? Or are you planning to fight us?" James Carter slightly curled the corner of his mouth, a cold smile briefly appearing on his experienced face. He did not respond to the young man's provocation. Instead, he slowly reached into his jacket pocket and took out a mobile phone. That action made the group of young people pause for a moment, their gazes shifting from mockery to curiosity. No one knew what he was going to do, and this uncertainty created a lurking discomfort in their hearts. James Carter opened his phone, calmly dialed the number. Putting the phone to his ear, he spoke briefly, his tone calm as if giving an order. "Come here immediately. I need to take care of a little matter." He did not explain, did not raise his voice, but the way he spoke, the calmness in his tone, and the way he put the phone back into his pocket made the group of young people involuntarily silent. A tense atmosphere seemed to envelop the entire street corner. James Carter crossed his arms over his chest, stood straight, and silently looked at the group of young people, his gaze devoid of patience. His silence at this moment became the heaviest pressure. The group of young people, although still acting defiantly, began to sense that this man was not an ordinary old man. A tall young man, with tousled hair and eyes full of arrogance, approached James Carter. He was clearly the leader of the group, with a confident demeanor and a piercing gaze, as if to assert his power over the older man who dared to challenge them. Stopping just a few steps away from James, he smirked, his voice dripping with mockery. "Old man, who do you think you are to dare meddle in our business? Don't you know you're getting yourself into trouble? Go home and sleep before things get worse." The group of young people standing behind burst into laughter, their laughter echoing throughout the street corner. They deliberately increased the pressure, as if wanting to force the man to retreat in shame. One of the guys in the group slapped the leader on the shoulder and chimed in, "This old man probably thinks he's a cop or a hero. How funny." Their eyes were full of mockery, as if they were enjoying the weakness they thought James Carter would show. But they quickly realized that this man was nothing like the people they had bullied before. James Carter did not move at all. Standing still, he straightened his back, his unwavering gaze fixed directly on the leader. Not a trace of fear or embarrassment appeared on his face. Instead, there was a chilling calmness. He let the group of young people finish speaking, then slowly replied, his voice deep and firm. "You keep talking about the trouble, but it seems you don't realize that you are causing it. I don't need to know who you are, but I know for sure that you are doing wrong. And I am here to ensure that this stops immediately." His words were not loud, but each one carried weight, striking directly at the group of young people. A few of those standing behind began to feel uncomfortable, casting furtive glances at each other. But their leader, though momentarily taken aback for a second, still tried to maintain an air of defiance. "Stop? What will you do to make us stop? Don't you see you're standing alone?" He took another step, almost standing right next to James Carter, his eyes clearly showing aggression. James Carter still did not back down. He maintained his distance, his sharp gaze fixed on the opponent, his voice this time slower but carrying an undeniable authority. "Yes, I stand here alone. But you don't understand. Sometimes just one person being right is enough to make the whole group of wrongs stop." These words made the atmosphere freeze for a moment. The leader of the group of young men sneered, but the confidence in his smile had diminished slightly. A few people standing behind started rolling their eyes, seemingly not wanting to get further involved in this situation. "Old man, you talk as if you are someone very important." Another young man in the group, smaller in stature but full of cunning, stepped forward. He deliberately spun the girl's handbag in his hand, as if to assert his control. "So what? Are you going to call the police, or call someone to help you? Go ahead and try." The whole group burst out laughing again, but this time, the laughter was no longer completely natural. James Carter noticed that. He understood that this group of young people was trying to control the situation, but their arrogance began to waver in the face of his steadfast attitude. James Carter looked straight at the leader once more, his eyes shining like a lightning bolt in the gloomy sky. He gently lifted the baseball cap in his hand and placed it on his head as a reminder to himself of the years spent fighting for justice and righteousness. "You are making a big mistake," he said, his voice deeper but no less sharp. "And believe me, this mistake won't just end with an apology." In the face of the mockery and defiance from the group of young men, James Carter remained unfazed. He slowly took the phone out of his jacket pocket, his sturdy fingers dialing the number calmly. His slow yet confident actions caused the group of young people to momentarily stop, their eyes fixated on the phone. "Come here immediately. I need a few people to handle this." His voice was steady, showing no emotion other than certainty. Immediately, a young man in the group burst out laughing, breaking the brief silence. "Who are you calling, sir? Grandchildren? Is there a town police force here? Do you think you're so tough?" His voice rang out sarcastically, accompanied by the laughter of his friends. The group of young people quickly regained their usual arrogance. One of them stood behind the leader, with a youthful face but a self-satisfied look in his eyes, laughing loudly. He must be calling the old people's protection team. Or call the neighbors over to watch for fun? The whole group burst into laughter, their laughter echoing throughout the street. But behind the laughter was an unclear discomfort. Perhaps James Carter's unwavering calmness had begun to confuse them. The leader, trying to maintain an air of confidence, stepped forward, standing closer to James. He looked straight at him, his sharp eyes seeming to scrutinize. "Come on, old man. We don't have all day to play with you. If you are waiting for someone to come and rescue you, just say it clearly so we know and can prepare." James Carter remained calm. James Carter did not respond to the mockery. He put the phone in his pocket, his eyes briefly flashing with a cold smile. He didn't need to explain. For him, his actions were enough to answer all questions. His unwavering confidence suddenly made the atmosphere feel different. A few members of the group began to sense the change, even though they couldn't put it into words. They looked at each other, the smiles on their faces gradually fading. A brief but heavy silence enveloped the scene. Only the sound of the autumn wind blowing through the street remained, mingling with the sound of dry leaves being swept away on the sidewalk. The young girl, still standing against the wall, her gaze shifting from fear to curiosity, but also unable to hide a glimmer of hope. The group of young people, despite still trying to maintain their arrogant facade, began to show clear signs of impatience. One of them muttered, "What is he playing at? He probably just intends to scare us." The leader of the group of young men smirked, tilting his chin towards James Carter. "We're waiting here, old man. What will you do next? Call his whole team over, I guess." But James Carter didn't say anything more. He just stood there, arms crossed over his chest, staring straight at the leader without showing any emotion. His silence, instead of easing the tension, made the atmosphere even more suffocating. A few minutes later, the sound of a car engine echoed from afar. The sound gradually became clearer, causing the group of young people to instinctively turn their heads to look. A gray truck, old but sturdy, sped down the street at a moderate pace. Right after that, two other cars also appeared, parking close to the curb just a few meters away from the group of young people. The car door opened, and tall, sturdy men with a strong build stepped out of the vehicle, walking with determination. Although they were not wearing military uniforms, their dignified demeanor and piercing gazes made the group of young people immediately sense something unusual. An elderly man with silver hair, seemingly the oldest in the group, approached James Carter, gently patted him on the shoulder, and then turned to look at the group of young people. He smiled faintly, but his gaze was full of authority. "Carter, did you call us to deal with these kids? They don't seem worth the trouble." James Carter did not respond. He just nodded slightly. The man looked straight at the group of young people, his voice deep yet powerful. "You all seem to be in more trouble than you think." The atmosphere suddenly changed. The smiles on the faces of the group of young people completely vanished, replaced by awkward and worried expressions. A cold wind blew through, but the chill seemed not to come from the weather, but from the imposing gaze of the newcomer. The unexpected appearance of James Carter's old team completely changed the atmosphere. If before, the group of young people still maintained their arrogance, now that confidence is beginning to fade. A few people standing behind took a few steps back, their eyes wavering. The men who just got out of the car carried an air of authority, each step taken decisively and firmly as if every brick beneath their feet was trembling. The leader, despite trying to maintain a tough demeanor, couldn't hide his unease. He glanced quickly at the newcomers and then turned back to James Carter, forcing a strained smile. But his voice, when he spoke, lost its defiance. "Old man, do you really need to call an entire army just for this small matter? We didn't do anything outrageous." A man in Carter's team, tall and with a piercing gaze, stepped forward. He stopped right in front of the leader, stood up straight, his face showing no emotion. His voice was deep, clear, and full of authority. "We once fought to protect this country with James Carter. You should know that just one finger of his would be enough to take you down. Therefore, it's best that you know who you're dealing with." Those words were like a sharp blade, cutting through any remaining arrogance in the group of young people. Each word carried weight, reminding them that James Carter was not just an ordinary old man, but a living legend of the arduous years of struggle. Carter's teammates didn't need to intervene. They just stood around the group of young men, their gazes stern and cold. Their presence, with the demeanor of seasoned warriors, created immense psychological pressure. The young men, now, could no longer maintain their arrogant demeanor. One by one, they bowed their heads, muttering apologies, their eyes avoiding the imposing presence of the men in front of them. Even a few people slowly backed away, trying to escape this embarrassing situation. James Carter kept a steady gaze on the leader, showing no signs of softness or compromise. He didn't need to say anything more, for his silence was enough to convey the lesson they needed to learn. When everything was clear, one of Carter's teammates approached the young girl and gently asked, "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" The girl shook her head gently, her voice trembling but full of gratitude. "I'm fine." "Thank you very much, uncles." The comrade nodded slightly, then turned to look at the group of young men. His voice was steady, yet equally chilling. "You all need to remember, respecting others is not just a moral duty, but the only way to survive in this world. Don't let yourselves encounter intolerant people like us again." The girl was taken to safety, but she didn't forget to look back at James Carter and his team with eyes full of gratitude. Those men not only helped her escape from a dangerous situation, but also left a valuable lesson for both her and the group of young people. When the group of young people had retreated, James Carter and his teammates stood for a moment, carefully observing the small corner of the street that had just gone through a chaotic scene. One person in the group chuckled lightly and turned to him. "Carter, you still stick to your old style, huh? Every time you make us step in for a trivial matter." James Carter smiled, a calm and meaningful smile. Doing the right thing is never a small matter. Protecting what is right has always been what we vowed to do, and I have no intention of stopping, no matter what happens. The sunset gradually descended, casting a warm orange hue over the small street. The men walked towards the car, each step carrying with it a sense of pride and responsibility, as if they were still on the battlefield of righteousness. And in that small street corner, peace was restored, not only thanks to James Carter's actions, but also to the spirit he represented: courage and unwavering protection. The story conveys a powerful message about courage and responsibility towards the community. Standing up to defend what is right does not require grand or flashy actions, but rather determination and integrity. From James Carter's actions, we learn that upholding justice is not just a duty, but also a way to maintain human values and compassion among people. After everything was resolved, James Carter's team parted ways, allowing him to continue his journey home. He walked slowly along the familiar path, each step echoing the steady heartbeat of a life devoted to great ideals. A gentle smile blossomed on his lips as if satisfied with what he had just accomplished. The western sky was ablaze with the golden orange hues of sunset, the light weaving through the tree canopies, casting an unusually serene beauty over the street. James Carter continued walking, his figure blending into the twilight, leaving behind a profound lesson on compassion, perseverance, and the strength that comes from the soul. The story ends, but the spirit it conveys will resonate forever, like the sunset stretching across the sky, reminding us of the value of compassion and the strength of those who dare to uphold righteousness.